The life of Moses is one of the most remarkable journeys ever recorded, spanning from the palaces of Egypt to the summit of Mount Sinai, from the exile in the wilderness to leading a nation to the edge of the promised land. His life was filled with jaw-dropping miracles, intense showdowns, and raw human struggle. From escaping death as a baby to leading a full-blown nation into the unknown, Moses' journey is nothing short of legendary. To get the full picture, we must follow his footsteps across the ancient world, moving from place to place where history unfolded before his eyes. Our journey begins in Egypt, in the land of Goshen. Here, the Israelites had lived for generations under the rule of the Pharaohs, once a favored people, but now enslaved. In this harsh world, a decree was sent out from the Pharaoh, or king. Every Hebrew male infant was to be drowned in the Nile. This wasn't just an act of cruelty, it was strategic. The Israelites had grown in number and strength, and Pharaoh saw them as a threat to his rule. He feared that if war broke out, they might side with Egypt's enemies and escape, weakening the empire. To maintain control, he issued an order to systematically reduce the Hebrew population. But one mother defied the order. She placed her child in a basket and set him adrift on the river, hoping for a miracle. And that miracle came in the form of Pharaoh's daughter, who found the child and named him Moses, raising him as her own in the royal court. For years, Moses lived in luxury, educated in all the wisdom of Egypt. His royal upbringing likely included instruction in hieroglyphics, administration, warfare, and Egyptian theology, preparing him for leadership. But this background would later be instrumental as he led the Israelites, drawing from both the Egyptian knowledge and divine revelation. His exposure to the grandeur of Pharaoh's court may have shaped his understanding of law and governance, which was ultimately refined through God's commandment at Mount Sinai, which we will get to later. But Moses, still knowing of where he came from, one fateful day saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. Enraged, he killed the Egyptian and buried the body. This act was discovered, and Moses, now a fugitive, fled to the only home he had never known. Moses escaped to Midian, a rugged land east of the Sinai Peninsula. Here he found refuge with a man named Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he married his daughter Zipporah. For 40 years, Moses lived here as a shepherd, tending flocks far away from the grandeur of Egypt. One day, while leading his flock near Mount Horeb, also called Sinai, Moses saw something that defied explanation: a bush that burned but was not consumed. From the flames of the bush, a voice called his name. It was God, commissioning Moses to return to Egypt and lead his people to freedom. And that was the turning point of his life. Reluctantly, Moses obeyed. He journeyed back to Egypt, where he confronted Pharaoh, demanding, "Let my people go." But Pharaoh refused, and what followed was a devastating display of God's power. 10 plagues that brought Egypt to its knees. Only after the final plague, the death of the firstborn to the Egyptians, did Pharaoh relent. This gave enough time so that the Israelites gathered in Ramses and set out on their exodus. From Ramses, they traveled to Succoth, a temporary encampment where they organized before heading into the wilderness. This moment of transition was when they realized that they were moving from slavery into the unknown, and also where the Hebrew people decide if they were to trust in Moses and in God. And next, they arrived at Etham, located on the edge of the wilderness, a point of no return. Here, they were fully dependent on God's guidance, following what was a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. Pharaoh, knowing that the former Hebrew slaves were on the move and leaving, sent out his army to track them down and bring them back, or slaughter them. Finally, the Israelites reached Pi-Hahiroth by the Red Sea, a seemingly impossible dead end. Trapped between the waters and Pharaoh's advancing army, their faith was tested. But God had led them here for a reason, to display his power and make it clear that their deliverance came not by human strength, but by divine intervention. Here, with Pharaoh's army closing in, Moses raised his staff, and the sea parted. The Israelites crossed on dry ground, but when the Egyptians pursued, the waters crashed back, swallowing them whole. Israel was free. But their journey had just begun. At Marah, the people, dying of thirst, found bitter water, but God made it sweet. At Elim, they rested by 12 springs. In the wilderness of Sin, they grumbled for food, and manna rained from the heavens. At Rephidim, Moses struck a rock, and the water flowed. The most pivotal moment came at Mount Sinai, where God formally established his covenant, or his promise, with Israel. It was the defining moment that set Israel apart as God's chosen people. The Ten Commandments and the broader Mosaic Law formed the foundation of Jewish life, covering everything from worship to justice, reinforcing the idea that obedience to God was absolutely paramount. Theologically, this covenant foreshadowed the coming of Christ, who would later fulfill the law and establish a new covenant. Here, amidst fire and thunder, Moses ascended the mountain and after 40 days and nights, received the Ten Commandments, sealing Israel's destiny as his chosen people. But as Moses received these divine instructions, the people below succumbed to idolatry, fashioning a golden calf. This act of rebellion truly showed the human struggle with faithfulness and the need for divine mercy. When Moses descended the mountain and saw this, he shattered the tablets in fury, needing to go back up to the mountain for another 40 days and nights and receive the commandments again. Leaving Sinai, the Israelites journeyed to Kadesh Barnea, where Moses sent 12 spies into the land of Canaan. 10 returned with fear, speaking of giants in the land, Nephilim, mighty warriors who made them feel like grasshoppers in comparison. Their terror spread like wildfire, and the people panicked, refusing to enter the land God had promised them. Instead of trusting in his power, they wanted to turn back to Egypt, longing for the very oppression that they had escaped. This was their punishment: 40 years of wandering, 1 year for each day the spies were scouting Canaan, until that entire fearful generation had passed away. Throughout their journey, they faced divine judgment. Fire at Taberah, a plague at Kibroth Hadavah, Miriam's leprosy at Hazeroth, and the rebellion of Korah. At Kadesh, Moses, in frustration, struck a rock instead of speaking to it. And for this act of disobedience, God forbade him from even entering the promised land. As they neared Canaan, Israel fought and defeated Sihon of the Amorites at Jahaz, and Og of Bashan at Edrei. At the plains of Moab, a man named Balak hired Balaam, a divination expert with a reputation for controlling supernatural forces, to curse Israel. However, instead of cursing them, Balaam prophesied blessings. This moment was significant because it demonstrated God's sovereignty over all the nations, including those who sought harm to his people. Balaam's words not only affirmed Israel's divine protection, but also included messianic prophecy, foretelling a future ruler from Israel who would reign here with authority. This unexpected twist turned what was meant to be a curse into one of the most profound affirmations of God's plan for his people. Finally, at Mount Nebo, Moses gazed upon the promised land, but he could not enter. He died at 120 years old, and God himself buried him in an unknown location. And while Moses' journey ends here, the story isn't over. After his death, Joshua takes up the mantle and leads the Israelites into the promised land, beginning the conquest of Canaan. If you want to see what happens next, the battles, the victories, and the fulfillment of God's promises, subscribe so you do not miss that video where we cover Joshua's incredible journey in the conquest of the land. The life of Moses is a journey of faith, failure, and fulfillment. He was born in Egypt, raised in Pharaoh's court, exiled to Midian, called by God, and became the leader of a nation. From the burning bush to the Red Sea, from Sinai to the wilderness, from rebellion to redemption, Moses' path was one of incredible highs and devastating lows. And though he never set foot in the land himself he led his people to, his legacy endures in the heart of millions. The life of Moses is not just history, it is foreshadowing for something greater. His leadership, intercession, and the covenant established between him and God all point forward to Jesus Christ, the ultimate deliverer who would lead his people into true freedom. Moses' journey through slavery from Egypt and into the Promised Land is the story for a lot of Christians today, coming from bondage into redemption, from wilderness and wandering into the hope found in Jesus Christ, and the hope of a future kingdom. If you enjoyed this explanation of Moses' incredible life, subscribe for more deep dives into biblical history, characters, and theology. And if you want a part 2 where Joshua comes onto the scene and starts slaying all the giants, then please like this video and subscribe so I know to continue the series. As always, thank you for watching.